My name is Lisa, and this is my story. We were just a normal family, Mom, Dad, and me, living in our small but cozy house. Dad worked hard to provide for us, and even though we weren't rich, we always had what we needed. I was 12 when the accident happened. It was a regular work day. Dad left for work in the morning like he always did, kissing Mom goodbye and ruffling my hair. "See you tonight, kiddo," he said. Those were the last words I ever heard from him. Later that day, 2 police officers showed up at our door. There had been an accident at work. Dad was gone. The first few months after his death were the hardest. Mom barely got out of bed some days, and I had to learn to take care of myself more than any 12-year-old should. Our neighbors helped when they could, bringing us casseroles and offering condolences, but nothing could fill the void Dad left behind. Then, about a year after Dad died, Mom met Tom at a grief support group. He was divorced and had a teenage son named Kevin. At first, Tom seemed nice enough. He'd come over for dinner, bring me chocolate bars, and try to make conversation about school. Mom started smiling again, and I guess that made me accept things faster than I should have. "Lisa, honey," Mom said one evening, holding my hands in hers, "how would you feel if Tom and Kevin came to live with us?" I remember staring at her, not knowing what to say. It felt too soon, too fast. But Mom looked so hopeful that I just nodded. They got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, and suddenly our house had 2 new residents. The first few months weren't terrible. Tom tried to be nice, and Kevin mostly kept to himself, but things started changing gradually. Every time I asked Mom to come to a parent-teacher meeting, Tom would make comments about how I was demanding too much of her time. When I needed new clothes because my old ones were worn out, he'd complain about expenses. That's when the visits to Grandma's house started. It began innocently enough, just occasional sleepovers when Tom's family visited. Then it turned into weekend stays. "It'll be good for you to spend time with your grandmother," Mom would say, but I could see the relief in her eyes when I'd leave. The stays got longer and longer, a few days here, a week there, sometimes 2 or even 3 weeks at a time. I started keeping extra clothes at Grandma's house because it was easier than constantly packing and unpacking. But the real breaking point came when Mom announced she was pregnant. I was 14 by then, and watching her beam with joy while sharing the news felt like a punch to the stomach. Tom stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking triumphant. That's when I realized they were building their perfect little family, and I was the loose end they needed to tie up. I still remember that night clearly. I was sitting at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows, when I heard Tom's voice coming from the kitchen. He wasn't even trying to keep his voice down. "Look, Sarah," he was saying to Mom, "we need to be realistic here. The house is too small for all of us now with the baby coming. We barely have enough space to turn around. Lisa's practically living at your mother's house already. Maybe it's time to make that arrangement permanent." My heart stopped. Even though I'd seen it coming, hearing it said out loud was different. What hurt more was that Mom didn't object. "You're probably right," she finally said. "Mom's house is bigger, and Lisa seems happier there anyway." I ran to my room and cried into my pillow that night. The next day, I told Grandma everything. I expected her to be sad or angry, but instead, she got this determined look in her eyes. "Listen to me carefully, Lisa," she said, taking my hands in hers. "If they want you to live here, we're going to do this properly. I won't have you feeling like some unwanted package they can just drop off whenever it's convenient." Grandma called Mom that same day. I could hear her voice from the kitchen, firm and unwavering. "Sarah, if you want Lisa to live with me, we need to make this official. I want to adopt her. Lisa deserves stability, not to feel like an orphan with a living mother. I'll raise her, make sure she gets a good education, and protect her interests. But you need to agree to terminate your parental rights." I held my breath, waiting. Would Mom fight for me? Would she finally stand up to Tom and choose me? She didn't. The legal process went surprisingly quick. Mom signed away her rights without hesitation, like she was signing a grocery receipt. Grandma became my legal mother, and I moved into her house permanently. The funny thing was, it didn't feel like a big change. Grandma had been more of a mother to me in recent years than Mom ever was. After that, visits to Mom's house became rare and uncomfortable. I tried a few times, mostly out of some lingering sense of obligation. Each time, the atmosphere was suffocating. Tom would barely acknowledge my presence. His son Kevin would disappear into his room, and the baby would cry whenever I came near. Mom would hover anxiously, constantly checking the clock. The last time I visited, I brought some photos to show Mom from my school play. She barely glanced at them before getting distracted by the baby's fussing. "That's nice, honey," she said, not even looking at me. "But shouldn't you be getting back? It's getting late, and Tom's parents are coming over for dinner." I left that day and decided not to come back. What was the point? The funny thing was, Mom didn't seem to notice my absence. The phone calls, which were already rare, stopped completely. My birthday would come and go without even a text message from her. The years passed, and Mom's absence became my new normal. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about her while doing everyday things, wondering if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted her choice. But those thoughts got fewer and farther between as time went on. My high school graduation day was bright and sunny. I sat among my classmates, scanning the crowd during the ceremony. I knew Mom and Tom wouldn't be there. I hadn't even sent them an invitation, but some small, foolish part of me still hoped they might surprise me. They didn't. But Grandma was there, beaming with pride, her camera clicking away as I walked across the stage to get my diploma. When it came time for college, Grandma didn't hesitate. "Don't you worry about the money," she said, when I started talking about student loans. "I've been saving for your education since the day you were born." College was like a fresh start. Nobody there knew my complicated family history, and I liked it that way. I threw myself into my studies, made new friends, and gradually built a life that didn't have space for wondering about Mom's absence. Years flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across another stage, this time with a college degree in hand. Grandma was there again, cheering louder than anyone else's family. Moving back home after graduation felt right. Grandma's house had long since become my real home, filled with warmth and acceptance I'd never found in Mom's new family. It was during one of our evening talks over tea that Grandma dropped the news. "I should probably tell you," she said, carefully stirring her tea. "Tom got a job offer in Arizona last year. Your mother sold the house and moved with the family." I sat there, cup frozen halfway to my mouth. They'd moved across the country, and Mom hadn't even thought to tell me. The news stung more than I expected it to. I forced a smile. "It's fine, really. I mean, she hasn't been part of my life for years anyway, right?" But later that night, I found Mom on Facebook. Scrolling through her profile, her privacy settings were loose enough that I could see her posts and photos. There they were, my half-brother, no longer a baby, but a growing boy, and Kevin, now a young man. Mom looked older but happy in the photos, always surrounded by her real family. I spent hours some nights looking through those photos, watching from a digital distance as my stepbrothers grew up and my mother lived her life, a life I was no longer a part of. They went on family vacations, celebrated birthdays, had backyard barbecues, normal family stuff. Stuff we used to do before Dad died. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. At first, Grandma brushed it off as nothing serious. "Just a cold," she said. But then came the fever and the weakness that made her struggle to get out of bed. I knew something was wrong when she couldn't even make it to the kitchen to bake her Sunday cookies. When she collapsed in the bathroom one morning, I called an ambulance. The next 2 weeks were a blur of hospital corridors, beeping machines, and doctors with concerned faces. I spent every possible moment by her bedside, watching her chest rise and fall, trying to pretend this wasn't as serious as it felt. One particularly bad night, sitting in that uncomfortable hospital chair, I made a decision I'd been putting off. Mom needed to know. Whatever had happened between us, this was still her mother lying in that hospital bed. I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook Messenger. "Mom, I need to tell you something important," I typed, my fingers shaking slightly. "Grandma is very sick. She's been in the hospital for 2 weeks now. The doctors are worried. I think you should come see her as soon as you can." I hit send and waited. The response came faster than I expected, but its content made my stomach turn. Lisa, I really don't have time for this right now. We're in the middle of renovating the house, and Tommy has a school play coming up. Besides, legally speaking, she's your mother now, isn't she? You're the one who should be taking care of her. I stared at the message, reading it over and over, not quite believing what I was seeing. But there was more. And just so we're clear, I won't be contributing a single penny to that old woman's medical bills. I have my own family to take care of. That old woman. Her own mother. I felt bile rise in my throat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered responding. But what was there to say? How do you respond to someone who dismisses their dying mother as that old woman? I closed the messenger app without replying. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. After the hospital stay, Grandma came home, but she wasn't the same. I learned to be a nurse overnight, managing medications, changing bedding, cooking soft food she could keep down. Some days were better than others. On good days, she'd sit up in bed and tell me stories about when Mom was little. On bad days, she could barely open her eyes. I took leave from my new job to care for her full time. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of medications, doctor's visits, and worried nights. Through it all, Mom never called, never messaged, never showed any interest in her mother's condition. Then came that terrible morning. I went to wake Grandma for her morning medication, but she wouldn't wake up. Her skin was cool to the touch, and in that moment, I knew she was gone. Through my tears, I pulled out my phone one last time. Mom needed to know, even if she didn't care. Mom, Grandma passed away this morning. The funeral will be in the coming days. Please come. Whatever has happened between us, she was your mother. This is your last chance to say goodbye. I kept checking my phone every few minutes. Each notification made my heart jump, but none of them were from Mom. One day passed, then another. I was already deep into funeral arrangements when her reply finally came. Lisa, honestly, you need to stop with all these messages. They're becoming really annoying. I don't know how to make this any clearer. I don't care what's happening with you or Mom anymore. That chapter of my life is closed. I had to sit down as I read further. And if this is about funeral expenses, don't even think about asking. I won't give you a single dollar. Kevin is getting married in a few months, and we have enough expenses as it is. I'm not going to let a funeral overshadow my stepson's wedding. We have caterers to pay for, a venue to book, and I just ordered my mother of the groom dress. My vision blurred with tears of rage as I continued reading. But don't worry, I'll definitely come when it's time to divide the inheritance. Make sure you keep me informed about that. The phone slipped from my hands onto the carpet. I sat there in Grandma's favorite armchair, my whole body shaking. This woman, this stranger who used to be my mother, was worried about a wedding dress while her own mother lay dead, was already thinking about inheritance money before we'd even buried Grandma. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally moved, something had hardened inside me. Fine. If that's how she wanted it, I'd handle everything myself. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. I met with the funeral director, picked out a casket I knew Grandma would have liked, simple but elegant, just like her. I arranged for flowers. White lilies were her favorite. I contacted her friends from church, her old bridge club, even tracked down some of her former colleagues from when she used to teach. I wrote the obituary myself, my heart breaking as I tried to sum up such a wonderful life in just a few paragraphs. Beloved mother and grandmother, I wrote, and each word felt like a testament to the truth. She had been more of a mother than my biological one could ever hope to be. A week after the funeral, I finally found the strength to start going through Grandma's documents. Her desk drawer was meticulously organized, every paper filed and labeled in folders, just like she'd kept them for decades. Birth certificates, tax returns, insurance policies, everything had its place. Then I found an envelope marked Last Will and Testament, copy. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a document, clearly typed and bearing Grandma's signature. As I read through it, I had to sit down, then read it again, and again. I, Margaret Eleanor Wilson, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. The contents were clear and direct, just like Grandma herself had been. She was leaving her house and all her savings, a sum of $200,000, to me, her legally adopted daughter. But it was what came next that made me catch my breath. To my biological daughter, Sarah Miller, I leave the sum of $10,000 and my family Bible. It is my sincere hope that she will read it and finally learn the true meaning of patience, compassion, and love for one's neighbor. I sat there for a long time, letting it sink in. Then I did something impulsive. I took out my phone, snapped a clear photo of the will, and sent it to Mom. No message, no commentary, just the image. The response was immediate. My phone started buzzing with message after message. I didn't read any of them. Then the calls started coming in. I watched Mom's name flash on my screen again and again, each time letting it go to voicemail. It felt satisfying. I was making coffee the next morning when I heard a car door slam outside. Looking through the window, I saw Mom and Tom practically running up the walkway. I took a slow sip of my coffee and waited for the inevitable. Pound, pound, pound. "Open this door right now, Lisa." Mom's voice was shrill, almost hysterical. I took my time walking to the door, unlocking it with deliberate slowness. "This is ridiculous," Mom burst in, waving her phone with the photo of the will. "This has to be fake." "There's no way Mom would do this to me. I'm her real daughter." I leaned against the doorframe, studying her flushed face. "I'm surprised you rushed all the way out here. Don't you have more important things to do? A stepson's wedding to plan? A venue to book? That mother of the groom dress to alter?" Mom's face went from red to purple. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Mocking us like this. This is obviously a fake." Tom interrupted, trying to sound authoritative. "We need to see the official will from a notary, not some random paper you could have typed up yourself." I smiled, and I made sure it wasn't a nice smile. "How convenient that you should mention that. The official reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the notary's office." "Fine," Mom snapped. "We'll stay here tonight." "No, you won't," I said firmly, stepping aside and gesturing toward the door. "This is my house now, and you're not welcome to stay here. There's a Holiday Inn about 3 miles down the road. I hear they have very reasonable rates." "You can't throw us out." Mom looked genuinely shocked. "This is still my mother's house." "No, Mom, it's not. And you're right. I can't throw you out of your mother's house, but I can throw you out of my house, which is exactly what I'm doing right now." I closed the door on their angry faces and leaned against it, my heart pounding but my mind surprisingly clear. Tomorrow would be interesting, to say the least. The notary's office was small, but professional, with dark wood paneling and certificates covering the walls. Mr. Johnson sat behind his desk with the air of someone who'd seen every kind of family drama possible. Mom and Tom arrived 5 minutes late, looking like they hadn't slept well in their hotel room. "Now that everyone's here, Mr. Johnson began, adjusting his glasses, "we can proceed with the official reading of Margaret Wilson's last will and testament." I sat quietly as he went through the formal legal language, watching Mom fidget in her chair. When he reached the part about the inheritance distribution, her face went from anxious to thunderous. "This is impossible!" Mom exploded before Mr. Johnson could even finish reading. "It has to be fake. She's manipulated everything." "Mrs. Miller," Mr. Johnson said calmly, "I can assure you this will is completely legitimate. I personally handled its preparation and witnessed its signing." "Then you're in on it too." Mom jumped to her feet, her voice rising to a shriek. "You're all conspiring against me. That little witch has turned everyone against me, just like she turned my mother against me." Mr. Johnson's expression hardened. "Mrs. Miller, I must ask you to lower your voice and sit down, or I will be forced to call the police." Mom dropped back into her chair, breathing heavily, but the silence only lasted a moment. "Sue her," she hissed, glaring at me. "I'll fight this with everything I have. That house belongs to me. Those savings belong to me. I'm the real daughter, the blood daughter." Mr. Johnson sighed, removing his glasses and cleaning them carefully before responding. Mrs. Miller, you are, of course, within your rights to contest this will in court. However, I feel professionally obligated to inform you that you would be wasting your time and money. What do you mean? Tom demanded. This will is ironclad. Your mother had it properly prepared, witnessed, and notarized. She was of completely sound mind when she made these decisions. Furthermore, he shuffled through some papers. We have extensive documentation showing that Lisa has been your mother's primary caregiver and closest family member for years. That doesn't matter, Mom snapped. Blood is what matters. Actually, Mrs. Miller, in legal terms, that's not correct. What matters is your mother's clear and documented wishes, and those wishes were to leave her property to Lisa, who was not only legally adopted by your mother, but also demonstrated consistent care and devotion to her throughout her final years. I cleared my throat. I also have all our Facebook messages, Mom, the ones where you refused to visit Grandma in the hospital, the ones where you called her that old woman and refused to help with her medical bills, the ones where you were too busy shopping for a wedding outfit to attend her funeral. Would you like me to show those to anyone? Mom's face went pale, then red. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said quietly. I've kept every single message, every rejection, every time you chose your new family over your own mother, every time you proved Grandma right about why she made this decision. Months passed, and the threatened lawsuit never came. Every time I checked my mail, I half expected to find legal documents, but there was nothing. Eventually, I realized Mom probably couldn't afford an expensive court battle. Her silence told me more about her financial situation than she'd ever admit, but she didn't stay silent on social media. One morning I woke up to dozens of notifications. Mom had written a long, dramatic post about how her own daughter had stolen her inheritance and betrayed her. She painted herself as the victim, complete with crying emojis and vague references to karma and divine justice. What she didn't expect was the response. Have you forgotten how you abandoned your own daughter? My father's sister commented. We all watched you push Lisa away year after year. My cousin Jack chimed in. You chose your new family over Lisa. You legally gave up your rights as her mother. You can't cry victim now. One by one, relatives spoke up, mostly Dad's side of the family, but even some of Mom's cousins. They reminded her of how she'd stopped bringing me to family gatherings, how she'd brushed off questions about me with vague excuses, how she'd missed my graduation, my college acceptance, every milestone of my life. Mom deleted the post after a few days, but the damage was done. The family had spoken, and they weren't on her side, but she wasn't done trying. The calls started coming again, this time with a different angle. Lisa, honey, she said in one voicemail, her voice sickly sweet. Tommy's starting to look at colleges, and we could really use some help with the tuition. He's your brother, after all. I deleted the message without calling back. She tried again a week later. Lisa, please. Just a small loan for Tommy's education. We're family. Finally, I picked up one of her calls, if only to end this once and for all. Family, I said before she could launch into her prepared speech. You haven't been my family since I was 14. You didn't care about my education when Grandma was paying for it. You didn't care about me at all until you needed something. Don't call me again. I hung up and blocked her number. It felt like closing the final chapter of a very long book. Now, 6 months later, I'm sitting in what is truly my house, watching the sunset through newly installed windows. The renovation isn't anything fancy, just some necessary updates Grandma had been planning anyway. The $200,000 sits mostly untouched in a high-yield savings account. I've got a good job, and between my salary and having no rent to pay, I'm doing fine. Sometimes I catch myself browsing online shopping sites or dreaming about luxury vacations, but then I hear Grandma's voice in my head. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy security. Be smart with it, Lisa. So I'm being smart. I'm building the kind of stable, sensible life that would make Grandma proud. I have no mother now, not legally, and not in any other way that matters. But I had 14 good years with my dad, and I had a grandmother who loved me enough to become my mother when I needed one. Some people don't even get that much. Story 2. Raised by a single mother who never seemed to stop, Erica grew up in a small house on the suburbs of Detroit. Little more than a phantom in her mind, her father had abandoned her when she was only a toddler. To keep the lights on and food on the table, her mother, Lisa, spent long hours cleaning offices during the day and working as a server at night. Erica watched the wrinkles develop on her mother's face with a mixture of respect and grief. But Lisa never grumbled as the years went by. Even if her uniform smelled somewhat of cleaning products and oil when she got home late at night, she would still find time to fix her favorite pants or quiz Erica on her schoolwork. "You will do great things, child," she would say, smiling wearily as she brushed Erica's hair back, "larger than I could possibly be." Erica carried those words with her, making them the cornerstone of her goals. Even if it meant taking on extra work, Lisa was able to maintain Erica enrolled in respectable schools in spite of their difficulties. That wasn't something Erica took for granted. She put a lot of effort into her studies. After courses, she would spend hours in the library, nose deep in management and financial literature, determined to make her mother's sacrifices in high school matter. She was not content to merely survive. She desired to prosper. By the time she received her degree, her efforts had been fruitful. She was awarded a full scholarship to attend Michigan State University to study business management. College went by quickly. Erica kept her head down, balancing internships and homework, while many of her classmates partied into the night. With everything on her shoulders, she couldn't afford to take it easy. As a continual reminder of her motivation, she kept a photo of her mother in her dorm room. Even on the worst days, Erica found strength in the thought of Lisa in her worn work uniform, smiling despite her weariness. In search of possibilities in the big city, she packed her things into 2 bags and relocated to Chicago after graduating. When she got there, reality hit hard. Her apartment barely had enough space for a walk-in closet. She could hear every word of her neighbors' late-night conflicts since the walls were thin enough. There were times when she wondered if she had made the right decision, and dinner was frequently little more than instant noodles. Erica, however, didn't give up easily. She got an entry-level position as an administrative assistant at a downtown corporate company. She put her all into the task, even if the salary was just enough to get by. She volunteered for additional work, stayed late, and learned everything she could. Erica was given greater responsibility once her supervisor, Karen, who was a no-nonsense woman, saw her determination. One evening, Karen handed Erica a stack of files and remarked, "You remind me of myself at your age. You will succeed if you continue." After 2 years, Erica's promotion to project coordinator was the first significant event. Her career took off from there. When she was 28, she had worked her way up the corporate ladder to become the department head, managing a staff of 20. Her approach to leadership was refreshing, fair yet firm, with a foundation of respect at all times. "If you treat this job like it's yours, one day it will be," Erica frequently said during trainings, demonstrating her belief in empowering her staff. Under her direction, her department flourished, surpassing goals and winning praise from superiors. However, the true prize for Erica was her team's commitment and trust. Her first day as head of the department, they gave her a modest celebration at the office as a surprise. Cake, inexpensive champagne, and a handcrafted card that was signed by everybody were served. Although it was simple, it had great meaning for her. It brought back memories of those ramen-eating nights in her small apartment, when she questioned whether she had made the right decisions. Erica never lost sight of her roots despite everything. She continued to phone her mother on Sundays to give her an update on her job and city life. Lisa always ended the conversation with the same remarks after listening proudly. "You're going to accomplish great things, youngster." And Erica began to believe it too, for the first time in her life. As members of Erica's team came to celebrate her promotion, the bar was filled with clinking drinks and laughing. It was a tiny, comfortable location in downtown Chicago, where you could relax without having to worry about how you looked. Her old friend and co-worker Marco raised his glass high. His voice boomed over the throng as he said, "Here's to Erica, the boss lady." Glasses clinking, the squad yelled in agreement as Erica struggled to keep the heat from rising to her cheeks. "Many thanks, everyone. Without you, I couldn't have done it." She raised her glass in response, shouting above the commotion. There was an obvious sense of friendship, a tribute to their years of respect for one another and their shared diligence. During this flurry of applause and laughing, Erica caught a glimpse of him drinking a drink while casually leaning against the bar. Before she could turn away, a cunning smile pulled at his lips as he met her eyes. He walked over. They moved with such assurance that people couldn't help but notice the joy. His voice was smooth but kind as he spoke. "What's the event?" "Just a little career milestone," Erica said, attempting to seem casual. "My department's new leader is me." His eyes glowed with real attention as he remarked, "That's impressive. It must be a difficult job. By the way, my name is Jake." She shook his hand and replied, "Erica." "Yes, it's difficult, but I've put a lot of effort into getting there." For what seemed like hours, they conversed. The bar's noise fades into the distance. Like Erica, Jake was a finance professional with a keen eye for statistics. Their talk flowed naturally, alternating between light-hearted jokes, city life, and job aspirations. By the end of the evening, Jake had won over half of Erica's squad, who teased him to stay for the next round. Erica and Jake began seeing each other more often over the course of the following few weeks. Long dinners replaced casual coffee dates, and soon Erica was spending most weekends at Jake's house. His apartment, a large, expansive room with floor-to-ceiling windows, high ceilings, and a movie-like view of the Chicago cityscape, was a sharp contrast to her own. In spite of its opulence, it possessed a coziness and comfort that Erica hadn't anticipated. Despite his success and charisma, Jake possessed a groundedness that Erica appreciated. He was quick to make her laugh, but he also paid close attention when she talked about her childhood memories or the difficulties she had at work. "You're amazing. You are aware of that." As they gazed at the city lights from his balcony, he would say, drawing her near, "Everything you've made is for you. It's not common. They have been dating for 6 months." Jake asked Erica to supper on a cool fall evening. She didn't give it much thought. He prepared meals for her frequently. He said it wasn't a huge deal to surprise her with lavish cuisine. However, there was a change in him that evening. He appeared preoccupied. A tense energy took the place of his customary easy assurance. The city spread out below them like a sea of sparkling lights when they went out onto the balcony after supper. Jake took her hands in his and turned to face her. In sharp contrast to his normal poise, his hands were clammy. "Erica," he said, his hands shaking but his voice was firm. "The finest months of my life have been spent with you. This may seem quick, but you simply know when you know, don't you?" As he extracted a little velvet box from his jacket pocket, Erica's heart began to accelerate. He opened it, and the ring within glistened with brilliance nearly as bright as his optimistic eyes. "Are you going to wed me?" he inquired. For a brief time, there was a sense of fragility mixed with confidence in his voice. Time paused. Behind him, the city dissolved, and Erica's feelings sprang to the surface. "Yes, Jake," she responded in an emotionally charged voice. "Yes, without a doubt." They stood there, encircled by one another's arms, with the city bustling around them, after Jake put the ring on her finger. It was more than simply a suggestion. It was an assurance of a shared future. Erica believed she had always dreamt about it. The Hargrove estate resembled a stronghold of riches and status. Its brick facade, draped in ivy, stretches far into the sky. As Jake pulled onto the long, curving road with its old oak trees and well-kept hedges, Erica felt her chest constrict. With its enormous arched windows, gargoyles perched on its borders, and an elaborate fountain in the front courtyard that seemed to gurgle with judgment, the house itself like something from a historical play. As he parked the car, Jake clasped her hand. His eyes showed his own apprehension, but his tone was light as he added, "You'll be fine." Despite her stomach churning, Erica forced a grin and nodded. Nothing had ever felt quite as daunting as this, even though she had met many people via her job, including investors, CEOs, and even a few high-profile individuals. Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove appeared as the front door opened. Tall and well-dressed, Charles Hargrove had the stance of someone who felt he owed the world something. With her exquisite gown and pearl necklace sparkling in the warm light of the chandelier behind her, his wife Eleanor was a picture of refined elegance. As Eleanor studied Erica's plain attire, she couldn't help but note the tiny droop of her lips. With a slick hand gesture that seemed more like a formality than a welcome, Erica Charles said, "It was a pleasure to meet you. This is Eleanor, my wife, and my name is Charles. It's good to meet you too." Shaking his hand, Erica managed. Then came Eleanor's, whose hold was chilly and fleeting. She went inside after them. With each stride, the foyer's overwhelming richness made her feel smaller. Oil pictures of stern-looking forefathers lined the walls, and the chandelier above glistened like a constellation. There were several dishes and a glittering array of silverware that Erica could hardly keep track of, and each plaque, with titles like Sir and Lady Dinner, was a formal event. In the drive, Jake had muttered a little preamble, but now everything was a haze. Eleanor's gaze began to follow her fingers, a little grin pulling at her lips, and she froze as she reached for what she hoped was the correct fork. Eleanor responded, "Perhaps things are done differently where you come from, dear," in a suave but condescending tone. The blood raced to Erica's cheeks. "Apologies," she muttered as she continued to understand everything, looking at Jake, who appeared to be ready to say something but changed his mind. Charles pointed to a sizable portrait that was hung on the other wall of the dining area, a man with a beard wearing a fitted suit. He remarked triumphantly, "That's Sir Reginald Hargrove, our ancestor via blood. He founded the Hargrove legacy here after arriving from England in the 1800s. A real visionary." "It's impressive," Erica said, attempting to sound enthusiastic despite her rumbling tummy. She was failing the entire evening, which seemed like an unwritten test. As the lunch continued, the topic of Erica's relatives came up. Eleanor leaned closer, her gaze keen and inquisitive. "Tell us more about your childhood, Erica. Please. Our family, and yours must be very different." Erica paused, aware of Jake's taut eyes on her. "Well, my mother and I were the only ones there. My mom put a lot of effort into raising me alone after my dad departed when I was a little child. She works as a nurse." The ensuing hush was deafening. Eleanor's well-groomed hands folded neatly in her lap as her smile tightened. How noble. But her tone was everything but admiring when she eventually uttered it. Following supper, the Hargroves led Erica into the living room, where Charles was standing next to a large family tree that was framed in gold. He pointed to the map and remarked, "It's important to know where you come from. One of the pillars of our identity is our heritage," Eleanor added in a sharp voice. "Erica, you must become acquainted with our history, customs, and manners if you want to become a member of this family. Lessons can be scheduled." Erica looked to Jake for encouragement, but all he offered was a pitying grin. He said, "It's not as bad as it sounds." Erica nodded, feeling trapped. She responded, "Of course," in a firm voice despite a part of her feeling like it was shattering. "Whatever it takes, I'll do it." There was a subtle softening in Eleanor's look. "Good," she answered, with a certainty in her voice that made little space for debate. "We'll start right away." The Hargreaves were still talking about the specifics of her training. A weight sank into Erica's chest. Yes, she had complied with their requests, but at what price? She couldn't help but wonder if she was gradually losing herself as she sat there surrounded by judgment and luxury. The weeks before the wedding were a haze of commitments, due dates, and ongoing inspection. The days of Erica started before dawn. Her alarm served as a harsh reminder of all she needed to balance, piercing the quiet of the early morning. She balances wedding planning with her rigorous work etiquette classes. Not a breath was to be taken. Mrs. Davenport, an older woman who taught etiquette, seems intent on molding Erica into the ideal Hargrove wife. Away from the table, in one of their sessions, Mrs. Davenport reminded Erica, "Additionally, keep in mind that when you scoop, the soup spoon slides away from you." Erica imitated the gesture, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the mountain of work that awaited her at the office and the many changes she would have to make to the wedding guest list. Mrs. Davenport softened her voice and told him that she was doing well. "These things require time." Erica gritted her teeth. She nodded courteously, although she was really tired. She wondered if she was running in circles or toward something because every day felt like a marathon with no end in sight. Her phone buzzed late one night after yet another exhausting session. To answer the phone, she went outside into the cool night air. "Hello, Mother." Her voice was more exhausted than she had meant when she said hello. "How are you doing, Erica, my love?" There was a hint of worry in Lisa's familiar, warm voice. "I'm all right," Erica told a fib, leaning on the building's chilly brick wall. "Simply busy. Much is happening." On the other end, there was a moment that only a mother could fill with silent comprehension. "Honey, you don't sound well." Lisa spoke softly. "Are you content?" Erica's throat grew constricted. "I'm not sure," she said. Simply said, there is a lot to accomplish. Jake's parents, the wedding, and the lessons. These are all expectations they have. "Sweetheart, I feel like I can't disappoint anyone." Lisa spoke in a forceful yet gentle tone. "Their life is not yours. Don't lose yourself attempting to live up to their expectations. You must express your want if this is not what you want. You've put in too much effort to allow someone to diminish your self-worth." Erica looked at the distant city lights as her eyes blinked rapidly and welled up. "Thank you, Mother," she muttered. "I'll work it out." However, the reality of her situation weighed down on her even more as she hung up. She wanted to trust what her mother said. However, it was intolerable to consider disappointing Jake and his parents. The Groves demanded grandeur, and the wedding day delivered. The location was a large estate with crystal chandeliers, white roses, and more employees than Erica had ever seen at one gathering. Her flowing white dress should have made her feel like a queen. Instead, though, she felt alienated and like a different kind of spectacle. While the guests were mixing, Erica was dragged aside by Eleanor, who had a cold smile and a designer dress. "Erica, our guests are awaiting drinks, please. As a sweetheart, would you make sure they were served?" Erica blinked, astonished. "The staff, I assumed." "No buts," Eleanor cut in, her voice piercing. "Take some initiative. This is also your wedding, after all." Erica complied reluctantly, lugging champagne trays from table to table. She forced a courteous smile at the guests, her dress dragging heavy and cumbersomely along the floor. Suffocating the entire room was the weight of the fabric, which reflected the weight of the day. Apparently unaware of her predicament, Jake and his friends laughed. However, Eleanor's voice cut through the noise as she went past his mother. "Tonight will be served by Erica. Don't you think it's good practice for her?" Erica's cheeks burned with embarrassment as the comment caused sporadic laughter. Her hands shaking, she walked toward Jake, unable to contain herself any longer. "At my own wedding, Jake? Your mother is treating me like a servant. This is incorrect." Jake scowled. His face was not one of concern but one of annoyance. "Don't cause a scene, Erica. Simply follow her instructions. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," she repeated, her voice rising. "This is supposed to be our day, Jake, and you're just standing there." Jake sighed, taking a sip of his champagne. "Honestly, Erica, you should be grateful I even chose you. There were plenty of women who'd kill to be in your position. Stop whining." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She gazed at him, her vision blurring as the reality she'd been avoiding suddenly solidified. This wasn't love. This wasn't a partnership. This was a performance, and she was nothing more than a prop before she could fall beneath the weight of it all. Her mom appeared by her side, her presence grounding. Lisa placed a steadying hand on Erica's arm and leaned in close. "Honey," she whispered. "Do you adore him? Do you truly want this?" Erica shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, Mom, I can't do this." Lisa nodded, her mouth set with steely resolve. "Then let's go." And just like that, Erica found the fortitude to make the toughest decision of her life. The room grew hushed as Lisa moved to the center of the big reception hall. Microphone in hand, the voices and laughing of the audience disappeared, replaced with an aura of expectation. Erica stood transfixed near the head table, her heart hammering as her mom's calm but forceful voice pierced through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lisa continued, her tone calm but forceful, I'd want to take a moment to discuss something crucial regarding truth and pretend. Her gaze wandered across the room, ultimately falling on Charles and Eleanor Hargrove, who sat stiffly at their table, their smiles wavering. Charles and Eleanor attended the same school as me, Lisa went on, her tone unflinching. Accents, regal titles, and ancestor pictures were non-existent in those days. Eleanor's mother worked as a waitress at the neighborhood diner, while Charles's father was a dedicated mechanic. They were decent individuals who were proud of their origins, honest and grounded. The titles, the paintings, the so-called English nobility, and the lineage you see here today are all fake. Like a wave, the muttering swept across the throng. Visitors looked at one another in disbelief, their gazes flitting to the Groves whose features had gone pale. Charles started to object, but Lisa stopped him with a hand gesture. She looked directly at Eleanor and stated, "You've built your lives on a lie. And now, while concealing your own truth, you've used that falsehood to disparage and condemn my daughter." Eleanor jumped up, her voice shaking with rage. "This is ridiculous. You have no right to know." "You dare?" Lisa cut in, her voice like a dagger slicing through Eleanor's outcry. "When everything you stand for is smoke and mirrors, how dare you treat my daughter as though she is beneath you?" Eleanor's facade broke when the audience gasped. In the midst of the confusion, murmurs changed to critical looks, and Charles sagged in his chair, his attempts at calmness disintegrating. Jake's expression was a combination of desperation and rage as he charged at Erica. "Erica? What the devil is this?" He grabbed her arm and snarled, "You let your mother to sabotage everything. Now fix it." Despite the pain in her chest, Erica's voice remained firm as she jerked her arm away. "Jake, fix it. They are this person. Who you are. I've been going above and beyond to be accepted in your world, but I realize now that I will never fit in. And I'd like not to." Jake's voice was low and poisonous as he hissed, "Erica, you need to be appreciative. Feeling thankful? I even thought about getting married to you. Would someone like you be taken by anybody else? A girl without ancestry or heritage. I'll always be better than you." When the words struck her, Erica experienced a wave of clarity rather than a breakdown. Her shoulders have straightened, and she is glaring at Jake with unyielding determination. "Jake, you're correct. I will, and I can do better." Erica turned to her mother and took solace in Lisa's resolute, proud eyes. Together, they left the harsh woods and their decaying facade behind and made their way toward the exit, past the steps and murmurs. Erica felt lighter than she had in months as she walked out into the cool night air. She had abandoned the life she believed she wanted in favor of something far more valuable: her independence, her dignity, and the opportunity to create a future for herself. In the weeks after the disastrous wedding, the meticulously built world of the Hargrove fell apart like a house of cards. In their social circles, word of their fake ancestry traveled swiftly. The town is talking about the story of their deceit. High society gatherings stopped sending out invitations. Their formerly impeccable reputation was irreparably damaged, and business colleagues turned away. The Hargroves were forced to sell their expansive estate and withdrew to a more subdued existence that was far different from the splendor they had claimed to have inherited. But without the protection of his family's reputation, Jake found it difficult to adjust. His haughtiness sounded hollow. Erica heard rumors that he was spending his evenings at bars, consuming alcohol and remorse to numb his frustrations. She made no effort to verify them. She had no desire to turn back, and his path was no longer hers to pursue. Erica instead concentrated on starting over. Going back to work was like entering a sanctuary. After learning about the wedding turmoil, her co-workers embraced her return. She was greeted first by Marco. He was holding a cup of coffee and had a smile on his face. "Erica, you escaped a bullet. Or a rocket, perhaps." He gave her the warm cup while joking. "It seems that way." Erica laughed in response. "Regards, Marco." Her co-worker across the office, Jenny, added her voice. "You're brave, girl. Few individuals would have had the fortitude to leave like that." Warmed by their encouragement, Erica grinned. In months, for the first time, she felt appreciated and seen. For who she really was, not for who she may marry. the workplace turned become a haven of comfort, a reminder of the life she had created for herself. Erica met Brian during this period of recovery. At a small get-together of their common acquaintances, they were acquainted. A backyard BBQ on a balmy summer afternoon, nothing extravagant. Erica Ortiz was instantly drawn to Brian's laid-back demeanor, quick grin, and sincere kindness. He held out a hand and said, "You must be Erica. You've been talked about a lot. I swear, everything will be okay." "Thank you," said Erica, shaking his hand. "You are Brian too, master of the resident grill and sporadic beer enthusiast." He laughed as he spoke. The two of them struck up a casual chat that continued well after the sun had fallen because of his contagious sense of humor. As their bond grew, Erica discovered that she was captivated to Brian's straightforward way of life. She was welcomed with warm embraces and sincere smiles by his family when she first met them. Simply put, we're thrilled that Brian has discovered someone who brings him such joy. His mother murmured, embracing Erica tightly. The chilly, critical atmosphere of the Hargrove estate with Brian was a sharp contrast to the coziness of their home. There were no false pretenses or demands to meet some impractical benchmark. They developed an organic and genuine bond while talking late into the night and laughing over takeaway. It didn't seem necessary for Erica to prove herself. She could well be. Meanwhile, Erica was still doing quite well at work. Her employer invited her into his office one afternoon because he had observed her leadership and determination. He handed a packet across the desk and added, "Erica, we've all been impressed with how you've handled yourself these past few months. Now is the moment for you to go forward. Congrats. You've been elevated to the position of Director of Operations." Erica was proud of the news. It was more than simply a job title or salary. When she left the workplace that day, it was in appreciation of her perseverance and hard work. For the first time in a long time, she felt fulfilled. When Erica looked back on her trip, she saw how far she had come. She had left a life that didn't fit with her principles, gracefully handled the repercussions, and created a life where she was liked and appreciated for who she really was. She sat with a cup of tea on the balcony of her little but comfortable apartment, looking out at the city lights and grinning. She had barely settled in. It was her creation, and she was genuinely at ease for the first time. Story 3. The air was clear in the morning. As I crouched amid the flowers, I could smell the smell of moist dirt. The dew still shimmered on their petals. I knew who it was without even looking up when I heard the distinctive crunch of high-end shoes on the gravel path. I saw scarlet bottoms, stilettos still playing in the mud, and my father's cherished garden. Only one person would dare to strut through them. Her voice was oozing with fake honey as she purred. I continued to concentrate on the fragile white petals, the identical roses my father had planted for my wedding, which had ended in divorce papers, a scandal, and treachery. And suddenly, the woman standing behind me was the precise reason for it all. "Hi there, Vanessa," I said plainly. "You know why I'm here." She stepped forward one again. Overhanging the flower bed was her shadow. I eventually turned, wiping my mud-covered hands against my apron. "Nothing needs to be discussed." A sneer formed on Vanessa's painted red lips. "The reading of the will is tomorrow, and Ethan and I think it's best we resolve things civilly." I took a deep breath and tightened my hold on the pruning shears. "My father lives here. His property." Her tone was patronizing as she corrected. "And we think we're entitled to our fair share because Ethan was essentially Robert's son for 15 years. Suddenly, I felt the shears in my hand weigh more. "Do you mean the same Ethan that had an affair with one of his secretaries?" Vanessa gestured with her manicured palm, perhaps erasing the ancient past. "He was pardoned by Robert. They continued to play golf on Sundays," until she abruptly stopped, her eyes bright. I tightened my jaw. The searing pain that still weighed heavily on my chest was pressed up against her words. In just 2 weeks since my father's departure, the vultures had already begun to circle. I strongly said that my father wasn't a moron. Ethan wouldn't have gotten anything from him. Vanessa's phony grin wavered. "We'll investigate that. Daniel, your brother, appears to have a different perspective." I felt cold. Since the burial, when he had spent more time consoling Ethan than his own sister, we had not talked. "Have you been in contact with Daniel's?" With a tense voice, I asked, "Oh, sweetheart." Crooning, she moved in closer, more than chatting. "He's been incredibly helpful." I clenched my jaw, recalling what my father had said years before. "Sweetheart, the roses require a strong hand, but never one that is harsh. There is a purpose for even the sharpest thorns." I looked into Vanessa's eyes. My voice was steady and cool. "Before I lose my manners, leave my property." She laughed. "The sound is as fragile as broken glass." "Your land. That's quite cute." She pointed to the expansive property. "Millions of dollars are worth this mansion. Did you really think you'd have it all to yourself, Charlotte? While the others go with nothing, we play home in Daddy's palace." Unfazed, I moved onward. My father built this house brick by brick. All the trees were planted by him. Each room was designed. Money isn't the issue here. This has to do with legacy. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Legacy, please. It's all about the money. And you will discover that the hard way when that will is read tomorrow." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder one final time before turning toward the garden gate. "Also, you may want to begin packing. Before we move in, Ethan and I will need to remodel for at least a month." Down the walk, her shoes clicked. I glanced at the blooms below. The white petals, once immaculate, were now stained by dirt, evidence of the way my trembling hands had crushed them. White flowers, according to my father, are a sign of fresh starts. However, all I saw was crimson. I took my phone out of the pocket of my apron and called the one person who would be sympathetic. "Leah? It's me. I'll guess. Vanessa visited you, according to my closest buddy." "Yes." My fingers clenched around the phone as I let out a breath. "She's just as awful as we anticipated. Would you be able to visit? I need to talk to you about anything about the will." Leah's tone was resolute and forceful. "In 20 minutes I'll be there. Do not be concerned, Charlotte. They don't realize how intelligent your father was." I hung up. I noticed something. There was a little envelope hidden under the rose bushes. It's in a corner, wet. My breath caught as I reached for it and withdrew. It was addressed to me, and I immediately recognized the handwriting as being that of my father. In my palms, I flipped it over. My heart is racing. For what duration had it been concealed there, anticipating my arrival? "Okay, Father," I murmured, staring down at the envelope. "You seem to have given me one final surprise." As I stood there, clutching what felt like the first piece of a puzzle my father had left behind, the sound of Vanessa's car faded into the distance. Ethan and Vanessa were going to find out that they had picked the incorrect opponent for whatever game they were playing. Leah showed up on schedule. One hand holds a bottle of wine, the other a law briefcase. "We might need this," I thought. As she entered my father's study, she spoke. I let out a breath. "You don't know." The unopened mail was still in my shaking hands as I perched on the edge of my father's leather chair. The familiar fragrance of pipe smoke and old books remained in the air, a soothing presence in the middle of the mayhem. This was his haven, his place. Additionally, it would be completely destroyed and remade to fit the ostentatious vision of Vanessa and Ethan if they had their way. "You still haven't opened it." Leah put her suitcase down and pondered deeply, her voice serene yet eager. I gave her a quick glance before turning back to the envelope. I flipped it in my hands. "I confessed that I wanted to wait for you." Leah didn't think twice once Vanessa mentioned that Daniel would assist them. She grabbed the bottle of wine, poured 2 full glasses, and gave one to me. "Your father was very particular about what he revealed and when." I looked up because of it. "What are you saying?" All she did was point at the envelope, crack it open. Charlotte, taking a big breath. With trembling fingers, I cracked the seal. There was a little key and 1 page of paper inside. I took a deep breath and started reading. "Someone who understands human nature as well as I do has already taken action on this state, Charlotte. If you are reading this, it's probably Vanessa. She did always make me think of a shark. No soul, just teeth. My desk's bottom drawer may be opened with the provided key. Everything you need to safeguard is inside, which is yours. Do you remember the chess lesson I gave you? To keep the queen safe, you may occasionally have to give up a pawn. Dad. Love, I felt a knot in my chest from emotion. Leah was on her way to the desk already. You were aware of this. I made more of a statement than a query. I assisted him in setting it up, she said. 6 months ago, immediately following his diagnosis, your father came to me. He was fully aware of the outcome. The drawer opened with a gentle click once I slid the key inside. There was a USB drive and a large manila envelope inside. Leah stopped me before I could grab them. You need to know something about tomorrow's will before you look at those. Reading. I scowled. What? 3 days before to his death, your father added a codicil. A what? A change to the will, she clarified. And it will transform everything, I promise you. I scattered the contents of the envelope on the desk after taking them out. As the pictures poured out, I gasped. Dozens of them. In a parking lot that is dark, Vanessa meets someone. Ethan walks inside the office of a lawyer. The printouts of Leah's emails and bank statements weren't there. There was more to my father's suspicion of foul play. He kept a record of it. He had them investigated. I muttered. Leah grinned. Better. They followed him. The USB drive. It shows Vanessa trying to buy off his nurse to get information about his will. I picked up one of the pictures 2 days before he passed away. A horrible feeling formed in my gut, causing my fingers to clench around the edges. Is Daniel there? My voice faltered. Leah gave a nod. 3 weeks before to your father's death, you met with Vanessa. I turned to the next picture. My heart is racing. Daniel was heading out of the meeting. A look of loathing distorted his features. He had what seemed to be a check in his hand. As proof, he held onto the check. Leah clarified. Took it directly to your dad. Robert realized then that he needed to move quickly. Vanessa, however, claimed that Daniel was assisting them. With my head whirling, I said, he was engaging in risky behavior. Leah told me, offering them just enough information to make them overconfident while surreptitiously helping your father gather proof. I recline on the chair and attempt to take it all in. My dad told me, but why? For Vanessa had to raise her hand first. Leopold, a briefcase containing some papers. Vanessa and Ethan will believe they have won when I read the will tomorrow. I straightened my posture. What? Leah extended her hand. They will receive a large share of the estate from the first reading. I sprang up so quickly that my wine glass overturned, leaving a scarlet mark on the carpet. Do you mean me? Let me be done. Unconcerned by my outburst, Leah said. The cortisol starts to work at that point. I set a trap in motion. She gave a nod. The instant they receive the inheritance, they activate a provision that exposes their attempted deception. All of the images, videos, and bribes are made public. I examined the evidence that was splayed across the desk. A wave of realization washed over me. To get them to incriminate themselves, he gave them the impression that they had won. That's right. Leah grinned triumphantly. Everything is left up to you by the genuine will, with a trust established for Ethan, Daniel, and Vanessa. All they receive is a well-publicized demise. My father's final lecture. My throat constricted as I traced his handwriting on the paper with my fingertips. He continued to protect me even after he passed away, teaching me, helping me fight back. Leah's tone grew softer. Another thing. Daniel wants to meet you tonight. Before tomorrow, you must know what more he has for you. I let out a breath and gazed at the lowering sun outside the window. Considering my brother, regarding Vanessa's arrogant expression in the backyard, about all my father had done with care, invite him to visit, I said. Arriving after nightfall, Isaiah didn't resemble the calm, self-assured brother who had stood next to Ethan at the burial. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin, his suit was rumpled, and his tie was loose. He held a leather portfolio like a shield as he paused at the study doorway. You look awful, I spoke, ending the quiet. Yes. Playing double agent isn't as enjoyable as the films portray it to be. He tried to grin, but his eyes never met it. May I enter? I pointed to the chair on the other side. The proof of our previous finding was still strewn all over Dad's desk, even though Leah had departed an hour earlier. Emails, bank statements, and photos. A proof-filled USB drive. Isaiah's gaze rested on the mess. You have located Dad's insurance policy, I see. I crossed my arms. What were you doing, and why didn't you tell me? The inquiry sounded more pointed than I had meant. He let out a big sigh as he slumped into the chair. Since I had to put things right, I was a fool after everything with Ethan and the way I handled you throughout the divorce. Charlotte, my brother is you. I made the correction. You were meant to be with me. I am aware. He took out a check from the portfolio and passed it across the desk in my direction. Vanessa asked me to testify to this. When that dad made his last, $500,000 decision to betray my own sister, he wasn't thinking well. I gazed at him and then at the check. You didn't cash it, though. He gave a head shake. No. I went straight to my father. His voice broke. Charlotte, you ought to have seen his face. He was disappointed, not enraged. He then explained his strategy to me. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9 times, each note piercing through the dense hush. There's more. Isaiah took out his phone and went on. I took notes on everything. Every meeting, every offer, every threat. Vanessa. Even before her father became ill, she had been organizing this for months. He hit the play button. Vanessa's voice filled the room. Your testimony regarding the old man's mental state will be used to challenge the will after he kicks. In addition to that, he and Ethan have a lengthy history together. We'll get everything. Charlotte won't even see it coming. I balled my hands into fists. When was this recorded? 2 months ago. Isaiah's face grew serious. But wait, things worsen. He fast-forwarded the audio. The voice of Ethan, right now. The house will be sold. Sell off the assets. Charlotte can go back to her modest flat and her dismal gardening company. In any case, she never deserved any of this. Turn it off, I murmured. Isaiah did. Then took out a final document. That's the reason I came tonight. Charlotte. Vanessa wanted more than money. She desired retribution. I scowled. Retaliation? For what purpose? For causing remorse in Ethan. With bitterness, he said. For requesting alimony from him. Because when you caught them together, he hesitated and looked horrible. The recollection struck me hard. Entering my own bedroom, observing them there. Vanessa's arrogant, victorious grin as my marriage fell apart all around me. For 3 years, she served as his secretary. Isaiah went on. Everything was planned by her. Worked her way into Dad's social circle and into his life. This document demonstrates that she began stealing from her father's business 6 months prior to your discovery of them. I grabbed the paper out of his hands and quickly scanned the account numbers and bank transactions. Dad was aware of this. My voice was barely above a whisper. Isaiah gave a nod. He discovered that he was constructing a case against her just before to receiving his diagnosis, but the cancer. He let out a breath. At that point, he began organizing this instead. The codicil, I whispered. Yes. Isaiah wiped his face with his palm. Tomorrow's going to be tough. They think they've won. To capture their historic moment when they take over the estate, Vanessa even hired a camera crew. In spite of everything, I laughed hollowly. She hired cameras. I gave a headshake. She's going to chronicle her own collapse. The irony would have pleased Dad, Isaiah said. A small, real smile breaking through. I met his gaze. I appreciate you coming here for this, even though I know that one night of disclosures won't be enough to undo the previous 3 years. He gave a nod. I've got your back no matter what happens tomorrow. The moonlight silvered Dad's garden as I turned to face the window. Do you recall when our father saw us fighting over that toy automobile when we were kids? Isaiah gave a little smile. The crimson Corvette. He forced us to clean the house's windows. We must learn to see things clearly, I remarked. With comprehension in his eyes, Isaiah nodded. And now you do. I looked back at him. What Dad was attempting to educate us makes sense to me. Even in the end, as Isaiah occasionally stated, winning isn't the greatest triumph. It's in letting your adversaries defeat themselves. The grandfather clock chimed 9:15. Tomorrow was rapidly approaching. You need to sleep, Isaiah stated as he gathered the papers. The show tomorrow is going to be incredible. I stretched out and touched the window pane as I watched him go. The glass felt substantial and cold to the touch. These windows had always appealed to Dad. He referred to them as his family's eyes of the house. They would see justice carried out precisely as he had intended tomorrow. And as the sun rose the next morning, brilliant and beautiful, I knew Vanessa and Ethan had no idea what was coming for them. As the camera team rearranged their gear, I sat in my father's study once more and watched Leah organize documents on the enormous wood desk. Anticipation was thick in the air, laden with the weight of all that was going to happen. Isaiah slid through the door, his countenance inscrutable. Outside, Vanessa is rehearsing her polite acceptance speech. Something like enjoyment made his lips move. In case she becomes overly emotional, she even prepares a second take. "Is everything prepared?" I asked Leah. She gave her briefcase a gentle touch. "Everything is ready. This envelope contains the sealed codicil. Copies of all the evidence are also sent, the instant they accept the original terms." A bustle in the corridor cut her short. The voice of Vanessa echoed through the door. "Hello," and thrilled. "We'll install the new chandelier here. The old one is so dated." As she adjusted her suit jacket, Leah whispered to herself. "Everyone, places. Now let's get the show started." Wearing a sleek black dress that likely cost more than most people's mortgages, Vanessa arrived first. Ethan trailed behind, seeming somewhat uneasy in his fitted outfit. Following them, the camera team checked angles and adjusted lighting. "Charlotte?" Ethan gave a cold greeting. It was the first frank conversation he had had with me since the divorce. "Let's get started," Leah declared, assuming her position as Robert's lawyer behind my father's desk. "I will now read his last will and testament, as well as any other papers he may have completed prior to his death." Vanessa was so excited that she almost vibrated. "We're prepared." The first reading, when my father's estate, including the home and company shares, was to be split, just as Leah had forewarned me. 60% to me, 40% to Ethan and Vanessa. Vanessa gripped Ethan's arm and shrieked. I was aware we were too important to Robert to exclude. Leah's voice pierced through her celebration like a dagger. But 3 days prior to Robert's passing, a cortisol was added to the will. Vanessa froze her smile. "A what?" Ethan whispered, now appearing anxious. "A modification." "What sort of change?" Leah broke the envelope's seal quietly. "Any inheritance under this will cannot be accepted unless specific financial irregularities found in the months before Robert's death have been thoroughly investigated." There was silence in the room. It seems like even the camera crew held their breath. "What are the anomalies?" Vanessa's voice had lost its triumphal edge. "Perhaps these will explain." The pictures were slipped over the desk by Leah, or this USB disk with video of a bribery attempt, or these bank records, which demonstrate Harrison Industries' systematic thievery. Ethan swiped one of the images. The color was fading from his face. "Where did you purchase these?" From his corner, Isaiah raised his voice. "Dad had a lot of evidence, including recordings of you two conspiring to use false testimony about his mental state to challenge the will." Vanessa leaped to her feet so quickly that her chair fell back. "Switch off those cameras." "Oh no," I responded, getting up to look at her. "The cameras remain in place. You wanted to capture this moment in history. You can't do this, remember?" she questioned, turning to Ethan. "Inform them that this is not possible." Ethan wasn't paying attention, though. He was still marveling at the images, particularly the one showing him entering a competitor's office with secret corporate papers. Leah went on, unfazed by the confusion before her. "The codicil is quite clear. All of this material is immediately released to the appropriate authorities upon any effort to claim an inheritance. The option is yours." "Option?" Vanessa's laughter was choked. "What choice? We're trapped by you." "No." I made the correction. "You have yourselves trapped. Every plan, all lies, every effort to take something that wasn't yours. All of it culminated at this moment." She became enraged with Isaiah. "You were meant to help us." He gave a shrug. "I was helpful. Not you, though." Vanessa's desperation spiraled as she spun back to Ethan. "Do something." But Ethan was already standing, straightening his tie with shaking hands. "It's finished. Vanessa, we've lost. It's the devil. I'm not going to let that." "Is my daughter." Dad's voice permeated the room. Everyone froze. Leah had hit play on a video file. The monitors used by the camera crew came to life, and there he was, my dad, slim but resolute, recorded a few days before to his passing. Additionally, it indicates that you have exposed your genuine self if you are seeing this, as I anticipated you would. Greed is a bad instructor, but realize his repercussions are wonderful pupils. Vanessa staggered backward, mascara streaming in black lines down her face. Leah answered casually, "Actually, this isn't over." "Yes, it is. To discuss the embezzlement evidence, the police are waiting in the foyer. I would advise working together. It might be useful for sentencing." As cops entered the study, they led Ethan and Vanessa away. The camera continues to roll, and I sensed him right then, my dad. In the air of the home he had constructed, in the yard, just beyond the windows, in a solid wood desk everywhere. He had arranged it all, not just to preserve his legacy, but also to impart one last lesson in patience, fairness, and long-term planning. Isaiah breathed out slowly. Given that the media circus that ensued was just what Vanessa had desired, I suppose the cameras did capture their momentous day, not in the manner she had intended. By evening, the street was lined with news vans. Reporter calls were constantly buzzing on my phone. "You need to see this." "I'm turning up the volume on Dad's old television," Isaiah said. Every channel was showing Vanessa's arrest. Her designer dress contrasted sharply with her tear-stained, streaked face. The Harrison Industries probe has found several cases of fraud, as cops escorted her into a squad car. The reporter rambled on. "Turn it off," I whispered, scratching my head. "I can't watch anymore." Leah came in the door, waving her phone like a medal. "It gets better," she smiled. "The DA just called. They discovered phony businesses, offshore accounts, and more." I let out a breath. Waves of relief swept over me. It was finished. Dad had won, and so had I. The weight of what had just transpired still remained in the air. Isaiah let out a breath and reclined in his chair. Haley wasn't only pilfering from her father's business. He claimed that she was in charge of a whole network of fraudulent schemes. I twisted and held my stomach as I swallowed. I wasn't sure why. The fate of my ex-husband still mattered to me. Isaiah scoffed, singing like a canary. When he faces severe jail term, it becomes out that he is not as faithful. Before I could react, a harsh tap at the study door made us all jump. A police investigator walked inside, his look stern but remorseful. "Miss Harrison," he added, "we need to address some further evidence we've unearthed." I beckoned for him to sit. "Morse." He nodded and placed a folder on the desk. In Miss West's apartment, we discovered documents. She had previously tried something similar. There are at least 3 prior incidents of her targeting rich families. However, she never succeeded on this magnitude before. Leah leaned forward. "Other families?" "Indeed. After integrating herself through work or social connections, she would manipulate events to obtain their resources." The folder was slid across the desk by him. "Does that sound familiar?" I scanned the documents after opening the folder. My chest constricted the secretary posture. I muttered. "It wasn't random. No, it wasn't. According to the detective, she singled out your ex-husband because of his affiliation with your father's business. After 3 years of self-doubt, blame, and what-ifs about my failed marriage, the fact that the affair was simply her way suddenly became crystal clear. There's more." The detective took out another paper and went on. "We found this in her personal files. It's a detailed plan. What she intended to do after securing control of the estate." My blood ran cold as I read the document he handed me. The money wasn't the only factor. It outlined accidents, ways I could meet an unfortunate end after the transfer of assets. Isaiah was to be framed for financial misdeeds, even sketches of how she intended to remodel the house. "Let's start by ruining Dad's garden." I scarcely heard me pronounce the words. She would have killed me. Isaiah's hand gripped his chair's armrest more tightly. She never would have gotten the chance. The detective's face was grim. With the fraud and attempted bribery accusations already pending, this greatly strengthens the case. She's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum after he left. Before Leah's phone buzzed, the room fell silent. She read the message and sighed. It's my contact at the DA's office. Holden just ended his remarks. I braced myself and he acknowledged to everything, including how he helped Haley access secret corporate data before your father's murder. I paused, fearing the response. Was he aware of her intentions toward me? Isaiah looked over the new papers and shook his head. That's why she didn't tell anyone about it. Probably knew he wouldn't have the stomach for it. I had an idea. Dad knew, didn't he? That's why he put all of this in action. Leah gave a slow nod. He had a suspicion. That's why he hired private detectives. Why? He documented everything. Charlotte? He wasn't merely safeguarding his reputation. He was protecting you. I turned to look out the window. The pandemonium had not affected Dad's roses, which were still in bloom. The stillness was broken by Isaiah. Before Haley's attorneys attempt to change the already written story, we ought to make a statement public. Leah opened her laptop and read a brief message asking for privacy during this trying time and stating that she would cooperate with authorities. Expert. Respected. Everything. Haley isn't. Dad would have liked that. A tiny exhausted grin reached my lips. Forward it. Isaiah took his jacket out. There's one more thing. He pulled out an envelope and set it on the desk. I found this in Dad's personal safe. Once justice is done, it is marked. When I opened it and saw my father's handwriting, my hands shook. The truth has finally surfaced, my beloved Charlotte. If you are reading this, keep your heart from becoming hardened by this experience. Life still needs living, and the garden still requires care. Justice wasn't the only reason I set this trap. I did it so you could be free, without a question. Free to blossom anew, free from fear. Always love. Dad. Reporters from outside kept up their live coverage, informing the world about the betrayals, the arrests, and the scandal. On the inside, though, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, surrounded by the proof of my father's love and wisdom. Calm. Isaiah exhaled. Now what? I glanced back at my brother and best friend after glancing out at the roses. We rebuild together now, I said. A month later, I watched as Haley and Holden were escorted into a courtroom wearing orange jumpsuits, a long cry from their expensive clothes. Everyone gets up, the bailiff yelled. Leah gripped my hand as we stood. She had demanded to be my moral compass as well as my attorney. She muttered, "You don't have to talk today. The evidence speaks for itself." But I had to. I knew. Dad had warned me in his letter not to become upset over this. My heart felt too afraid to be silent. As she went by, Haley's gaze met mine, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, only desperation. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, her attorney had attempted to negotiate a plea agreement. The DA refused to budge. Your Honor, the prosecutor began. The state would seek to bring into evidence Exhibits A through F, establishing a pattern of systematic deception and conspiracy spanning 3 years. I watched as the images, bank statements, and recordings were revealed with each disclosure. Haley's complexion darkened. Slumping in defeat, Holden simply gazed at his hands. Charlotte Harrison is called to the stand by the state. It was like traveling across the ocean to get to the witness box. I sensed that everyone was watching me. The jury is straining forward while reporters are scrawling on their notes. Haley's eyes pierced my back. For the record, please provide your name. Harrison Charlotte. Could you also explain your connection to the defendants? I looked directly into Haley's eyes. For 15 years, Holden was my spouse. Haley was his secretary, and the lady he had an affair with. I sucked in a calming breath. 6 months after our divorce, they were married. While my father was ill, they began to visit him and developed a bond with him. Disapproval. Haley's lawyer shot up. Pertinence. Motive is established, Your Honor. The prosecutor replied. Overturned. I went on. I explained the threats, the manipulation, and the proof that Dad had gathered. The prosecution, Miss Harrison, displayed the papers that had been discovered in Haley's flat. When did you learn about his intentions to keep you safe? After they were arrested, I swallowed hard. My father had a suspicion that something similar might occur. He gathered proof for that reason. Why he modified his will? I spoke firmly. Even after he left, he continued to protect me. That's when Haley snapped. She got up quickly. Her handcuffs were rattling. He was a cunning old guy who couldn't bear to watch his beloved daughter suffer any losses. The entire situation is a setup. Sit down, Miss West. The judge gave the order. Do you believe you have won? She growled at me. Do you believe this is the end of it? I once ruined your marriage. I'll also figure out a method to ruin everything else. It shook the courtroom. She kept yelling threats, but the bailiffs held her. Holden appeared to want to vanish. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Remove the defendant. As they dragged her away, I attracted Isaiah's interest in the gallery. He gave me a subtle nod. Any pity had just been dashed by her fury. Leah leaned closer. That, in my opinion, simply sealed her doom. I turned to see Haley being escorted away from the courthouse doors. For the first time in years, I wasn't terrified. Justice had been served, and it was now ready to blossom anew. Story 4. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I really don't like the way you're acting, Huxley, the executive vice president, said sharply. You must choose. Be let go from the firm or degraded. His words hit me like a truck. As he went on with his tirade, I stood there dumbfounded. This was no ordinary day. It was the day before a crucial business transaction reached its conclusion. A deal I had been guiding from the outset. Suddenly, Huxley insisted on replacing me as the principal negotiator. I didn't know what was causing the sudden outburst. He had never behaved in such a manner. What's wrong with this? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. His remark made everything plain. This is your fault, he snapped. You're getting penalized for exceeding me. It was there. Huxley, who was the same age as myself, unable to cope with my achievements. It has nothing to do with the business or the discussion. It was intimate. He didn't want me to succeed. Not in a position he believed he deserved. In particular, it was unbelievable to me. I had worked hard, poured my energies into this position, and now my superior was trying to take my successes away. I didn't want to work for a corporation like this. What was the point of my labor if it only resulted in sabotage and jealousy? I'm finished. I spoke firmly. I'll resign. You have the entire negotiation tomorrow. The executive vice president. With that, I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving Huxley to deal with the mess he created the next day. President Riker, who was also Huxley's father, entered the room just before the negotiation started. He appeared perplexed. Where's Emery? He inquired. This negotiation was meant to be his. Huxley, looking smug, responded, I fired him yesterday. Riker's face transformed in an instant. His perplexity grew into wrath as he glanced at his kid. You what? You fired him. But why? He made a demand. Huxley attempted to defend himself, obviously unprepared by this response. I thought I could handle it better, he said confidently. Riker, however, didn't believe it. Have you looked over the negotiation materials at all? He inquired. Huxley's face flashed panic as he reached for the papers. His confidence dissolved as he glanced at them. He had missed a critical detail, and it showed. His face became white. I'm 38 years old, and my name is Emery. My career has been an interesting journey. I've had 3 job changes, none of which were due to layoffs or business closures. My motivations were more personal. However, I usually explained that it was for professional advancement. That was just more convenient. Without further investigation, the majority of employers accepted this explanation. But something unexpected occurred during my 4th interview for a job. The Vice President Nixon saw straight through me. That's not the true reason, is it? He looked right at me as he asked, You don't appear like someone who switches professions solely for professional growth. And if that were the case, you'd be aiming higher. Our firm and your last one are around the same size, so what's the true stories? Caught off surprise, I realized honesty was my best option. I shrugged and told him the truth. I was surprised when Nixon paid close attention and nodded when I described my predicament. I got it, he added with a smile after I was done. I understand why you didn't want to say that up front. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. I wasn't sure if I had come across as confident when I left the interview. I was shocked to receive an email a few days later. They wanted to recruit me as the new sales manager, not for the supervisory role I had sought for. Perplexed, I phoned to explain. There must be a mistake, I said. I applied for another position. Nixon chuckled. No error, he said. Your expertise makes you the ideal candidate for our current sales manager's upcoming retirement. The role of a manager is to guide, not to follow. You know that, don't you? His statements made sense, and I accepted the offer. When I joined the firm, I instantly observed something peculiar. I wasn't bothered by the fact that the majority of my coworkers were far younger than me. In fact, I found it refreshing. My younger colleagues valued my open-minded leadership approach and contributed new ideas and enthusiasm, but not everybody was content. Huxley, the executive vice president, appeared to have an issue with me. I wasn't sure why at first, but once the former sales manager retired and I took over the position formally, it became evident. Huxley began criticizing everything that I did. Huxley publicly chastised me one day after I turned in a monthly business report to the senior team. He yelled in a meeting, "You should have gotten my approval first." The other executives appeared perplexed. I had always provided accurate and comprehensive reports. "Are you frustrated?" I inquired about Huxley's meaning. "To which instructions do you mean?" calmly asked. He lost it at that point. He launched into a tirade of grievances, saying I had gone too far. It was obvious that Huxley disliked my initiative, but instead of focusing on what was best for the firm, he turned it personal. And that's how he got himself here, with Huxley attempting to undermine me just because he couldn't take my success. "This is a new position for you." Huxley gave me a patronizing warning. "You're like an inexperienced driver, prior to making any choices. Check with me or the other executives first." His remarks were painful. It was demeaning and untrue to compare my experience to that of a novice driver. I was confident in my skills because I had years of experience. As I stood there trying to figure out how to respond, Nixon, the vice president, stepped in to defend me. He moved the conversation along deftly. He had complete support for this position from Emery's predecessor, the former sales manager. "Firmly," Nixon said. "Additionally, the sales team has stated that they find him easier to collaborate with. He has already had a beneficial effect." The other executives nodded in agreement when they heard this. They appeared persuaded by Nixon's arguments, but President Riker appeared dissatisfied. He turned to his son, Huxley, and chastised him for his needless tirade. "Talented people can't perform well if they're constantly second-guessed," Riker said firmly. Then looking at me, he added, "From now on, the sales department will handle all negotiations directly." Emery appears prepared to assume this duty. Despite my relief at the support, it was obvious that Huxley wasn't pleased with the result. His face was a picture of frustration. Over the next 2 weeks, his rage developed into subtle acts of disturbance. Small but major hurdles started sprouting up across the department. Little things were involved at first. Negotiation samples were sent late. Promotional materials went lost, or other departments delayed their help. By identifying alternatives, such as using different samples or making improvised solutions, my team and I were able to get around these problems. However, the issues persisted. Indeed, they appeared to become more regular and intentional. I kept thinking that Huxley was responsible for everything. Although each department had its own managers, they all blindly followed Huxley's directions when he gave them instructions like putting other orders ahead of ours or postponing our requests. Although I couldn't hold them solely responsible for obeying directions from superiors, it would have been beneficial if they had at least notified my staff beforehand. Then it became evident that we were dealing with sabotage when something happened. We had arranged a hotel conference room for a crucial negotiation, but at the last minute, the reservation was abruptly canceled. The hotel informed us that someone from our company had called and canceled it when we called to inquire about what had happened. It didn't take me long to figure out who was to blame. Huxley was the only one with the purpose and the resources to do anything like this. I had to face him, I knew. Ignoring his actions would only make matters worse. Determined to find the truth, I gathered all the evidence and entered his office. Huxley played innocent, as was to be anticipated. He shrugged and replied, "I don't know what you're talking about. It must have been a mistake on your team's end." However, his story didn't make sense. With the facts in front of him, the abrupt cancellation, the small number of individuals who were aware of the reservation, and the finance department's affiliation with Huxley all led clearly to him. Huxley became quiet. He was unable to provide a strong defense for his involvement, notwithstanding my desire to escalate the matter. I had to focus on the bigger picture. The success of the business and our department depended on the outcome of the negotiation. Bringing up a public dispute with Huxley might endanger our client's confidence. I spoke to him forcefully instead. This is too crucial a negotiation. If you continue to meddle, I will be forced to bring this up with President Riker. I can support myself with recorded evidence. Huxley gave me a scowl but said nothing. He seems to have backed down for the time being. I still had a hunch that he wasn't finished stirring up trouble. As I had feared, Huxley made his boldest move yet at the worst possible time. Even though I was in charge of the negotiator, he attempted to take over once again. His actions generated pandemonium, and my staff had to work harder than ever to keep everything on track. Despite the obstacles Huxley created, I was resolved not to let his involvement ruin everything. This agreement was too essential to the firm and my staff. I concentrated on leading my staff through the hurdles, ensuring we kept professional and productive. Even though Huxley had attempted to undermine me, I was aware that if I remained strong and concentrated on my work, everyone, including President Riker, would ultimately learn about his actions. Ultimately, individuals like Huxley can erect short-term barriers, but they cannot prevent someone who is driven to achieve. Knowing that we could overcome any obstacle as a team, my team and I were prepared to take on whatever lay ahead. The abrupt cancellation of the hotel room was one of the many challenges we had previously surmounted, and the discussion was finally coming to an end. It appeared like the senior executives would finalize the deal the next day, but Huxley called me into his office early that morning. "I cannot trust you with this important negotiation," he said with a smug look. "From here, I'll take control. You shouldn't be concerned about it." I was confused and taken aback. "I don't get it," I said, attempting to sound calm. "What's the matter?" Huxley scowled in a contemptuous tone. "That's the problem. Why are you unable to just do what your employer says? You may choose. Take a demotion or lose your job. You are no longer needed for this position." I was dumbfounded by what he said. Tomorrow was the final round of the discussions, something I had worked relentlessly on from the very beginning. It was shocking that he would suddenly jump in and take control. I was surprised by Huxley's passionate and violent reaction. Huxley went on, sneering as his face changed to one that was almost delighted, as I stood there trying to take in what he had said. "You're getting in trouble for surpassing me." His jealousy was shown there. My triumph was too much for Huxley, who was my age. All along, he had been subtly undermining my efforts. He chose to be outspoken when I remained mute, though, because I was about to close the sale. It appeared to please Huxley. "You were becoming conceited," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. "You know, just because you can speak English? You have worked for 3 different trading companies according to your resume. But you know what? There are many people here who speak English as fluently as you do." As the head of human resources, it was easy to determine how he obtained my CV. Was under his control. Huxley must have pressured them into showing him my personal details, but his reasoning was absurd. "What are you trying to say?" Despite my mounting annoyance, I asked in a calm voice. Huxley laughed, obviously enjoying his own reasoning. "I can speak English proficiently too, so we don't need your involvement in tomorrow's negotiations." His misconception that my business English skills were the key to the negotiation success was laughable. He was unaware of how much more was required to close a deal this size. Still, I didn't feel the need to correct him. If he wanted to take over, so be it. I had no desire to stay in a company where hard work and accomplishments were overshadowed by petty jealousy and sabotage. "I'm finished," I spoke firmly. "I have no attachment to a corporation when my bosses take credit for my work. You have the entire negotiation tomorrow, EVP," without waiting for an answer. I turned and marched out of the meeting room, seething. I went to pack my things in the sales section, determined to leave this toxic environment behind. On my way, I ran into Nixon. He quickly sensed something was awry. "You seem distressed," he said, worried. "What happened?" Nixon brought me to his office and I decided to tell him everything. I explained all of Huxley's actions, from his recurrent sabotage to his last attempt to take over the discussions. I even brought up the earlier instances, such as the hotel reservation cancellation. Nixon paid close attention as I talked, his face growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, he closed his eyes and seemed lost in thought for a moment. I readied myself expecting him to belittle my concerns, but when he finally spoke, his tone was thick with fury. Once again, EVP Huxley has done it. Once more? Confused, I asked. Nixon did not directly respond to me. Instead, he said, "Did you observe anything strange in the executive meetings?" I considered it for a while. Except for me, that is. There weren't any other persons near my age at those meetings, I added. I initially assumed it was because older people typically fill those roles. But now that I think about it, even for a mid-sized trading company, it's strange. Surely there are talented younger staff who should be part of those talks. Nixon gave a slow nod, his expression bleak. That's right. Huxley has a tendency to exclude younger individuals and talent from those gatherings. Let me explain why. According to Nixon, Huxley had joined the company about 5 years ago, after his previous employer went out of business. It wasn't merit that brought him here. It was a favor. The president's ex-wife had asked Huxley be given a position, so he grudgingly took him on board. Since then, Huxley had been utilizing his position to strengthen his control. Now that the president has remarried, Huxley realizes his position is even more perilous. Nixon claimed he feels threatened by younger, more capable staff, which is why he's been methodically keeping them out of leadership jobs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So that's why he's been targeting me? I inquired. Nixon offered a sour grin. It's not just you. Huxley has no real trading experience and came from a completely different industry. His only advantage is that he looks young. His age is frequently underestimated. Before you joined, he made sure no one who could oppose him got too close to power. Hearing this made everything click. Huxley's actions weren't just about me. They belonged to a wider pattern of manipulation and insecurity. It explained why he had gone to such lengths to sabotage me, but it also made me realize something important. His fear of being outshined wasn't my problem. It was his Nixon. I appreciate you telling me this, I said, getting to my feet. But I can't stay in a company where this kind of behavior is allowed to continue. Nixon understood my choice and nodded. I'll take this up with the president. Huxley won't continue to get away with this. As I left Nixon's office, I felt a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration that I had to leave behind a career I had worked so hard for, but relief that I wouldn't have to deal with Huxley's toxic conduct longer. My focus now is on moving forward and finding a place where my efforts would be valued. Huxley frequently made audacious claims about how he would appeal to younger workers, but he never really supported them with data. The seasoned executives nevertheless paid attention, presuming he was knowledgeable. Over time, it became evident that having peers of his age or younger around him undermined his status. Instead of strengthening his talents or acquiring certificates via training, Huxley chose the simpler road, killing his opponents. He assumed that by eliminating others, his ideas would carry more weight, and he would have less competition. Employees in their late 25 and 35s, particularly those in supervisory roles, became his main targets. Any discernible actions or accomplishments on their side were met with intimidation, unfounded allegations, or other means of expulsion. Those who value their tranquility in jobs often resigned to leave the harsh work environment. This left the company with only two types of employees: the older, well-established president and fresh-faced younger staff who were just starting their careers. Now, I understood Huxley's actions more clearly. He wasn't just a toxic colleague, he was a manipulative office bully. His major objective, even at the expense of others, was to preserve his reputation as the room's youngest and most competent CEO. His underhanded tactics often went unnoticed by the president and other higher-ups, only becoming apparent when the victims were on the verge of leaving. I had mentioned Huxley's behavior to the company president once, but he dismissed my concerns. He couldn't believe his own son would act so petty and jealous. To him, it was unthinkable. After all, the president had built the company from the ground up. transform it into a competitive contender in the business. He found it incomprehensible that someone like Huxley would put outward appearances of youth and importance over true self-assurance. But I knew better. I had seen firsthand what occurs when such conduct is left unchecked. Jealousy and sabotage had gone unnoticed at one of my previous jobs until it was too late, and the business failed. I felt it was time to approach Nixon personally. Executive Vice President Nixon, I started. What objectives do you have for this business? Nixon appeared perplexed by my unexpected inquiry. My objectives? Well, I'm hoping we can continue to boost our earnings. The president's successor is also very capable, even though he's still a student, he replied. His tone appeared to indicate that he hoped I would overlook Huxley's conduct and avoid stirring any controversy. It was evident that Nixon, who had been with the company for a long time, preferred stability to conflict. But I couldn't ignore the problem. Taking a deep breath, I revealed something I hadn't mentioned to anyone before, not even during my job interview. Do you know why I've changed jobs 3 times? I inquired. Nixon gave a nod. Yes. You mentioned being forced out due to jealousy. Well, that's unfortunate. We're fortunate to have someone with your level of talent. I gave a headshake. But that's just one side of the story, I said. In actuality, those 3 businesses have ceased operations. They've either split, dissolved, or gone bankrupt. They are no longer in operation. Nixon's face changed from composed to astonished. That can't be true, he said. Those businesses were doing very well when we conducted a background check. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to check their websites now. I suggested Nixon take out his smartphone and began looking. With each passing moment, his face grew more and more alarmed. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. But how could this have happened? It's simple, I explained. The people who drove me out became more confident and started repeating their actions with others. When a cycle like that continues, it kills a corporation from the inside. A firm cannot function without its people. If employees lose trust and start leaving, the company will eventually collapse. Nixon's countenance got serious as he pondered my statements. I said, if this matter with Huxley isn't solved, this firm might meet the same fate. Huxley's harassment may seem tiny compared to what I've faced in the past, but it's becoming a big concern. He's already pushed me to choose between being demoted or losing my job. If I resign, it will only encourage him to repeat this behavior with others. After a long silence, Nixon finally nodded firmly. I understand your perspective now, he said. This isn't just workplace drama. Jealousy-driven sabotage of the business is a severe problem, and I will not tolerate it anymore. I felt a sense of relief with Nixon on my side. There was now hope for change. I went to HR to get the resignation documents I had previously prepared after talking with him about the next course of action. Just as I was leaving, President Riker came, looking bewildered. What's happening? He inquired. Huxley, standing boldly alongside him, declared. I've already taken care of the negotiation. Emery won't be involved. What are you saying? Riker narrowed his eyes and asked. Emery was meant to handle this. Why isn't he involved? I fired him yesterday, Huxley said with a smug smile. It's fine. I'm capable of managing it. The only thing left to do is sign the contract, and I can communicate in English. Riker's face became cold. Have you looked over the negotiating documents at all? Sharply, he asked. The executives from the other firm are arriving today. How do you plan to manage this without Emery's? Huxley, who had imagined the negotiation was only a formality, in a sudden panic, he snatched up the papers and started hastily going through them. When he discovered a crucial detail he had missed, his face went white. The contract wasn't written in English. It was in Arabic, the official language of the Middle Eastern company we were dealing with. An hour before the negotiation, I received a panicked phone from Huxley. Emery, we need you at the hotel right now, he pleaded. I giggled quietly. Huxley, this is completely different from what you stated yesterday. Didn't you declare you didn't need me? I didn't realize the contract was in Arabic, he muttered, his voice unsteady. Well, I replied, if you had read the documents earlier, you would have known that. I ended the call and let him handle the mess he had made. Some things I believed are learnt the hard way. Many people couldn't overcome the challenges in our negotiation process, but I had a unique advantage. I stood out because I could bargain in Arabic with ease. Speaking 7 languages was one of my skills, and delivering a joke in Arabic to lighten the situation was as simple as breathing. It would be disastrous if the discussions moved to Arabic, and the executives who relied on us were only able to discuss the subject in English. The agreement would collapse because they would feel insulted. Huxley's claim of ignorance was not an excuse because all conditions were spelt out in detail in the paperwork. His desperation was obvious when he started accusing me of fraud, claiming I had hidden my skills by not listing all of them on my resume. I couldn't help but chuckle. Fraudulent employment. Really? I answered, not stating every qualification isn't fraud. Besides, I never claimed I could only speak English. Huxley's voice became bitter. If I had that skill, I'd brag about it, he said bitterly. That is how we vary from one another. I responded calmly. I don't need to boast about my talents. No time to brood over Huxley's jealousy. I knew the agreement would collapse if things went on as they were, so the negotiation was crucial. Clearly out of his element, Huxley began to growl in exasperation. Seeing an opportunity, he became so enraged that he vowed to resign and inform his father, the president of the firm. I gave him encouragement. Why don't you call your father now? Put him on the speaker and tell him why you attempted to cut me out of the discussion. Huxley hesitated, but finally did as I recommended. The instant he started speaking, I knew I had won. I could already see the result of his obvious desperation. The bargain was mine to keep by the time I got to the motel, 10 minutes late. Amusingly, Huxley had memorized an Arabic saying, "Emery will be here soon," and kept repeating it to delay for time. Nixon had foreseen this problem, and had booked me a room on another level, instructing me to arrive slightly late to teach Huxley a lesson. I tried to diffuse the tension by using humor when I joined the negotiation. The conversation flowed more easily after I made a joke about how Arabs and Americans manage their time differently. The contract was essentially signed after the atmosphere calmed down. As I saw for visitors, I let out a long sigh, relieved. The business was safe, and the deal went well. Exhausted from the tension, Huxley, who had been sitting motionless in the corner, sagged into a chair. President Riker apologized for Huxley's actions and thanked me for filling in. He will be subject to disciplinary action from us. Firmly, Riker said. Under his father's scowl, Huxley said nothing. Riker fulfilled his promise back at the office. I took you in when you had nowhere else to go. And this is how you reward me. Riker chastised Huxley in front of the executive team. It's like getting bitten by my own dog. Write your resignation letter today. Until you find another work, you can remain. But you will lose your job if you don't comply. You gave Emery the same option without any issues. Huxley. He promptly consented to resign, trembling under the weight of his father's rage. While his resignation was processed instantly, I found it difficult to maintain a straight face while he hurried to air. Riker spoke to the whole team during the next week's morning meeting. He described Huxley's wrongdoing in detail and threatened to punish everyone who had assisted him in his sabotage. Under investigation, those who had dutifully obeyed Huxley's commands were either demoted to inferior positions or quit. The company also adjusted its hiring practices, bringing in more experienced employees in their 25s and 35s. This positive shift allowed younger staff who had previously felt stifled to thrive. The corporation was revitalized when Huxley was removed from the equation. However, Huxley himself struggled to find another work, confronting the long-term ramifications of his conduct. Later, Riker asked me something that had been on his mind. Why didn't you promote your ability to speak 7 languages in your resume? It's such a valuable talent. I smiled and explained. For me, it hasn't always been an advantage. It's been more of a hindrance. When I was younger, I was interested about languages and became proficient in 7 by the time I completed college. Using the expertise was part of my first employment, but it ultimately limited my options. Even when I wanted to participate more actively in negotiations, I was limited to interpretation and translation duties. Despite understanding how to enhance negotiations, I wasn't permitted to speak my ideas. My superiors rejected my request for a promotion to a more involved position, claiming that an interpreter only needs a working mouth and not intelligence. My coworkers misunderstood my role and resented me, thinking I was receiving special treatment. I walked out, frustrated. At my subsequent 2 jobs, I repeated this process. My linguistic talents made me useful, but they also brought jealousy and anger. By the time I got to this organization, I made the decision to minimize my language skills in the interview. It was Nixon who saw through me and understood my potential. Riker thought over my narrative and nodded. I see now why it was so important to address Huxley's actions. We appreciate your patience and assistance in identifying these problems. The business flourished after Huxley left. Riker kept his promise to repay my efforts. The following year, he advanced to the role of chairman, and Nixon became the new president. I was also promoted, rising from sales manager to executive vice president. Despite the promotion, I remained involved in managing the sales department, ensuring our team stayed strong and innovative. My current priorities are cultivating trustworthy subordinates and fostering an atmosphere that encourages the growth of a variety of skills. I utilize my linguistic talents not simply for convenience, but to establish bridges across cultures and increase our reach. I genuinely think that persons in leadership positions have a duty to develop talent, and I use this approach in my everyday work. Story 5. Willow Hart sneered at me when I announced my resignation. I stayed calm, keeping my gaze steady and quiet. The conversation had been about the company's choice to cut labor costs, and Willow seemed to enjoy blaming those who took advantage of overtime pay. Camden Brooks, her little shadow, seemed just as excited about cutting expenses. A week later, my phone rang nonstop with calls from the company. When I finally answered, the president sharply asked, "Who exactly are you?" I couldn't help it. I laughed. I introduced myself as Harper Quinn, a 57-year-old employee with 35 years of loyal service since graduating college. I explained how our company provided administrative services, especially for busy presidents of other companies, helping them with clerical tasks and handling tax-related matters. I was proud to say I managed 40 clients. However, despite having a part-time helper, the workload had become overwhelming. But I couldn't show weakness. My clients had relied on me for years, and their struggles pushed me to keep going. Today, as I sat at my computer, Camden and Willow's constant harassment was on my mind. Camden, who was 7 years younger than me and now head of the tax department, had completely changed after his promotion 3 months ago. His once polite attitude had turned rude, and he often complained, making every interaction difficult. Even when I tried to stand up for myself, he didn't care and would just tell me to follow the manual, warning me not to take unnecessary steps. Willow, who worked as Camden's assistant, also joined in the bullying. She criticized my work efficiency and made fun of my position, even though I had turned down the chance to become the department head, a fact neither of them knew. I continued doing my job, but the harassment didn't stop. Camden accused me of working too much overtime, saying it was wasteful, and Willow would sigh and agree, claiming that my overtime was hurting the whole department's performance. The real reason for my overtime was that Camden had dumped a month's worth of client files on my desk, telling me they had to be done by the end of the month. After work, I looked at the pile of files, feeling exhausted. Wait, all these have deadlines this month? I asked myself in confusion. But before I could fully process the situation, Camden was already packing up his desk, uninterested in my concerns. "I'm heading out. Good luck with that," he said casually as he left the office, leaving me with an overwhelming amount of work. Willow soon followed, adding to my frustration with a mocking laugh. As I sat there, I realized that some of the files had been Willow's responsibility. That's when it hit me. Camden and Willow were trying to push me into retiring. My extensive experience and deep knowledge of taxation made me a valuable resource for the rest of the department, even more than Camden. His unfriendly attitude and unattractive personality made people avoid him, except for Willow, who seemed to stay close to him for strategic reasons. It was clear that Willow was trying to impress Camden, and her harassment wasn't just personal. She wanted to win his favor, as he was the one evaluating the department's performance. Despite the challenges, I had to keep working, balancing my regular tasks with preparing tax declarations for my clients. The workload seemed endless, but I knew if I claimed overtime, Camden and Willow would complain even more. So I resigned myself to working extra hours without pay. Then, unexpectedly, I was called to the president's office. Our company had recently gotten a new president after the former president became ill. The new president, his son, didn't know much about the company yet. When I walked into the office, I saw Camden and Willow smirking at me. The atmosphere was tense as the president dropped a bombshell. "Harper, we need you to resign by the end of the month." My head spun. I asked for more information, and it turned out that Camden and Willow had accused me of overbilling for overtime. While others had around 15 hours of overtime, they claimed I had worked over 60. The president, unaware of the real situation, seemed impressed by Camden and Willow's zero overtime record. It was then that the truth hit me. The extra overtime was because I had been doing both Camden and Willow's work. But if I told the president that, it might look like I couldn't manage my time properly. I calmly explained the situation, stating that I hadn't overbilled for overtime, but had simply struggled to finish the massive workload within regular hours. The president sighed deeply, unsure of what to do. He doubted my story but admitted there wasn't enough evidence to take action against me. Even so, the weight of their accusations hung heavily in the air. He insisted that they couldn't keep someone who worked at such a slow pace. Resigned to the situation, it was clear the president had made up his mind. He suggested I resign, and there wasn't much left for me to argue. After dedicating 35 years of my life to the company, I was being asked to leave. A deep weariness washed over me. Despite all my hard work, especially the extra tasks dumped on me by Camden and Willow, none of it seemed to matter. I agreed to leave at the end of the month, reminding the president that I had already informed him of my intention to resign. As I glanced at Camden and Willow, their smug smiles told me they were more than satisfied with the outcome. Willow, with her usual sarcasm, taunted me as I left the president's office, saying, "Thanks for quitting." Her words cut through me, but I kept silent, responding with just a steady gaze. Camden also made his approval clear, gleefully talking about how happy he was to cut labor costs. He even went as far as to label me someone who exploited overtime pay. As they chatted excitedly, I began thinking about the handover process. I needed to organize documents for all my clients and make sure everything was in order before I left. I personally said goodbye to as many clients as I could, ensuring appointments were set up, where possible, for those I couldn't meet. I sent letters to let them know who their new point of contact would be. A week after my resignation, I was enjoying some quiet time at home when my phone rang. Seeing the company's number on the screen, I hesitated. I had already completed all my paperwork, including social insurance procedures, so I didn't see a reason to answer. However, after receiving several calls from both the company and Camden and Willow's personal phones, I reluctantly picked up. The president's urgent voice came through the line. "Who exactly are you?" he asked again. I couldn't help but chuckle and replied, "Just an unemployed woman who resigned, that's all." His tone became even more anxious as he explained the chaos that had erupted since I left. 40 clients have called to stop doing business with us," he revealed, his panic evident. He practically begged for me to come back, saying everything had fallen apart. Sighing, I stood up and made my way back to the company. When I arrived, I saw Camden and Willow waiting for me. They looked exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes and a noticeable change in their appearance. It surprised me, and I asked what was going on. Camden glared at me and said angrily, "Since you left, we've been flooded with calls. Clients are canceling transactions, not just yours, but also from companies we were planning to work with. What did you do?" Willow, looking equally frustrated, echoed his accusation. Her weary appearance showed how much the situation had taken a toll on her. Both of them suspected I had done something underhanded to cause all the cancellations. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I had a feeling I knew why the clients were leaving. Thinking out loud, I mumbled my thoughts. Camden, however, wasn't satisfied with my explanation. He outright accused me of orchestrating the chaos and demanded I go with him to the president's office immediately. Without waiting for my agreement, He practically dragged me there. As we entered the office, Camden declared, "President, I've brought her," with a sense of authority, while Willow followed closely behind. Ignoring their harsh tone, the president turned to me and asked about the sudden stop in transactions after my departure. I took a deep breath and explained, "Our clients don't need us to manage their taxes. There are plenty of accounting firms that offer cheaper services. The only reason they stayed with us was because of me." Camden, annoyed, shot back, "Who do you think you are?" Willow sneered as well, questioning my worth to the company. But I stayed calm and continued explaining that I had always offered personalized tax-saving strategies, which made my clients stick with us. It wasn't just about doing the job, it was about offering them something valuable. Camden dismissed my approach as inefficient, arguing that their manual, by-the-book methods were better. The president sighed deeply, recognizing that Camden and I had very different ways of doing things. He looked serious as he said, "Actually," his tone signaled that something important was about to be revealed. "I received a surprising call from my father, the former president," he began. "It turns out that some of the clients who canceled came directly to him to negotiate, asking if we could bring you back." I was shocked. I hadn't expected clients to go that far for me. The president's father emphasized that the tax department had been thriving because of my contributions. Not only had I managed my own clients effectively, but I had also helped other colleagues with theirs. "You knew more than even Camden did," the president added. "If you hadn't turned down the promotion to department head, you would have been in a much higher position by now." The president's face showed regret. Willow looked stunned, as if she was struggling with the idea that I could have been her superior. The president apologized for making me resign in the first place, clearly realizing the mistake they had made. He asked if I would consider taking back my resignation, explaining that according to his father, I was indispensable to the company. While I appreciated this sudden change in perspective, I hesitated to accept. Before I could respond, Camden interrupted, visibly upset. He protested the president's decision, questioning why I was chosen over him. Willow quickly backed him up, praising Camden's leadership and expressing disbelief that I was being favored. But the president wasn't having it. He sternly addressed them, revealing that since I had resigned, numerous complaints had surfaced from the tax department. It seemed Camden had been shifting his workload onto others, even handing off some of Willow's work to subordinates. Camden's face turned pale as the president exposed the truth. Camden had been dumping his client work onto others while accusing me of being a thief. The irony of the situation became clear as the president explained how Camden had been manipulating the system all along. To make matters worse, the president brought up rumors about Camden and Willow's romantic involvement. Camden tried to brush it off, claiming he was just mentoring Willow as her superior, but the president wasn't convinced. He had receipts from the accounting department showing expensive dinners that Camden had charged to the company. Confronted with the evidence, Camden was at a loss for words, sweating profusely. Willow turned ghostly pale, realizing the seriousness of the situation. The president accused them both of neglecting their duties, inflating expense claims, and violating company policy by having an affair, especially while Camden was married. In a calm but firm manner, the president announced their immediate termination. Camden and Willow tried to resist. Camden desperately pleaded, "I have a family." Willow echoed his sentiment, her voice shaking with fear at the thought of being fired. She promised to apologize to me and others for piling work on us, but it was too late. Her concern about her reputation only heightened her desperation. She begged for a second chance, but the damage was done. Sensing their desperation, I couldn't help but offer some advice. "Why don't you stop resisting? It's undignified," I said calmly. Camden glared at me and snapped, "Shut up! What would a single person like you know?" I sighed and replied, "Camden, you are the one who got me fired. It's just karma. What goes around comes around. Maybe it's time to take some responsibility." Camden looked away, clearly frustrated, while Willow bit her lip in distress. I knew more about their misconduct and turned to the president with a smile, asking, "Should I share the rest?" Both Camden and Willow immediately panicked, trying to stop me from revealing more, but I issued them a warning. Wrongdoings eventually come to light, and they should face reality before things got even worse. At that, Camden and Willow collapsed to their knees, pleading for mercy. The president, however, had made up his mind and fired them on the spot. Later, I revealed the full extent of Camden and Willow's misdeeds, including how Camden had faked business trips to spend days with Willow, and how they had bullied other employees into quitting. They would give them sudden tasks with impossible deadlines, making their lives miserable until they left. Some of those employees had asked me to stay quiet at the time, but since they had moved on to better jobs, I decided it was time to speak up. The president was furious at the revelations, especially about the inflated expense claims. He expressed his anger over how they had manipulated the system and planned to cut Camden and Willow's final pay. Camden, with tears in his eyes, begged the president not to dock his salary, fearing the impact on his family, but the truth about his affair with Willow had already spread. It led to Camden's divorce, and both of them now faced compensation claims as part of the lawsuit. I became aware of the full situation when Camden reached out to me, asking for help persuading the president to reconsider their firings. Desperate, Camden and Willow had found themselves in a dire situation. Because of the tight-knit nature of the tax industry, word of their misconduct had spread fast, making it nearly impossible for them to find new jobs. They struggled to make ends meet, and eventually both were forced to take on day labor at construction sites, a far cry from their previous office roles. Willow would often call me, crying and pleading for help. "Harper, please help. I just wanted a better life." "I never really liked Camden," she sobbed over the phone. But despite her tears, I couldn't ignore the fact that their situation was a consequence of their own actions. Many people, myself included, had suffered because of their behavior. I firmly reminded Willow, "You can't unring a bell. What's done is done. The consequences you're facing now are because of the choices you made." Willow's protests were filled with regret, but there was nothing she could do to change the outcome. She had to face the reality of her actions, just as Camden did. As for me, I felt a sense of closure. Though their downfall didn't bring me joy, it brought a sense of justice for the unfair treatment I and others had endured. While they struggled with the mess they had created, I was ready to move forward, knowing that sometimes what goes around truly does come around. That said, I decided to distance myself from the chaos of the corporate world. Even though the president begged me to come back, I had no desire to return. Once I had been told to resign, the door was closed for me. Instead, I found peace helping out at a friend's small tax office. It was a way to earn some extra money while enjoying a much more relaxed lifestyle. I no longer had to deal with the stress and drama that came with working in a big company. Looking ahead, I began to dream about starting my own tax office. I imagined a place where I could serve my clients in a personal and meaningful way, without all the red tape and corporate rules. I wanted to create an environment where I could focus fully on my clients' needs and be on equal terms with them. As a tax accountant, my goal was to provide a service where my clients felt valued, not treated like just another number in a system. This marked the start of a new chapter in my life. It was a chapter filled with excitement and new opportunities. I was free to pursue what truly mattered to me, creating something of my own and building stronger relationships with the people I worked with. My second life was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where this journey would take me. No longer tied down by corporate demands, I felt lighter and more in control of my future. Every day brought a new sense of purpose, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My focus was clear: to build a business where I could thrive and where my clients could trust that their needs were my top priority. As I moved forward, I knew this new path was the one I had been waiting for, a chance to grow both personally and professionally in ways I hadn't thought possible before. With a heart full of optimism and determination, I eagerly anticipated